The human's hand passed through the shimmer field like a blade through water. Wrong. Everything about this moment was wrong. Captain Valsara of the Royal Guard stood motionless in the observation chamber, her 4 eyes fixed on the viewing portal, her breath suspended in the stillness that preceded disaster. The eternal prison hung in the void beyond, a crystalline sphere containing 20 stasis fields that had held the traitors for 300 cycles. Nothing touched those fields. Nothing survived touching them. The energy signatures alone could dissolve matter at the molecular level. She had watched 6 execution attempts over her career. The condemned had screamed for less than a second before becoming vapor. The human didn't scream. He stood with his fingers submerged in the field, his expression neutral, almost contemplative. His name was Marcus Webb, according to the diplomatic files, a cultural liaison, unarmed, unmodified. He had been touring the station with Ambassador Kerlan when he had stopped at this viewport, asked a single question, and made a request so absurd that protocol had frozen. "Are those people alive in there?" The ambassador had confirmed it. Alive. Conscious. Aware. Sentenced to eternity for crimes against the throne. I'd like to get them out. The silence that followed had been absolute. Ambassador Kirlan had signaled the guard. Valsara had moved to intercept. Standard procedure. But the human hadn't run. Hadn't argued. He had simply waited while they summoned the Queen. Queen Thessera had arrived within the hour. She stood beside Valsara now, her presence a weight that made the air feel solid. Her voice, when she finally spoke, carried no anger. "Only precision. Explain your request." The human turned from the viewport. His eyes met the Queen's without flinching. Valsara's hand tightened on her weapon grip. "Your Majesty, I'm not questioning your justice system," Marcus said. "But I've studied your people's history. The Eternal Prison was created during the Fracture Wars. Those 20 women inside were convicted of attempting to poison the royal family. But according to the trial records I was permitted to read, no poison was ever found. No evidence was presented except the testimony of a single court official who died under suspicious circumstances a month later." The Queen's silence stretched. Valsara felt her pulse in her throat. "No one questioned the Eternal Prison. No one questioned sentences passed by the High Court 3 centuries ago." "You believe they are innocent," the Queen said. "I believe they deserve a chance to prove it. They have been judged by a system that was later reformed because it executed 12 innocent nobles the following year." Valsara's breath caught. She had never heard of such executions. But she was royal guard, not a historian. The Queen, however, showed no surprise. "The reforms came too late for these 20, Marcus continued. "They're aware and they're fully conscious. They've experienced 300 years of isolation. If they're guilty, that's more punishment than any crime deserves. If they're innocent, then every moment we leave them there is another injustice. And you believe you can free them? I'd like permission to try." The Queen studied him for a long moment. Then she gestured to the portal. "Show me." Now, watching the human's hand rest inside the field that should have killed him instantly, Valsara understood that something fundamental about the universe had just shifted. The field rippled. Colors that had no name danced across the human's skin. The woman trapped inside the nearest stasis bubble was visible now, her face frozen in an expression of eternal despair, her hands pressed against the interior surface of her prison. 300 years of that expression. 300 years of that moment. Marcus's fingers closed around something invisible. He pulled. The stasis field shuddered. Warning klaxons screamed through the station. The woman inside jerked once, her eyes widening. Then the field collapsed inward, folding into itself like paper into flame. The woman fell forward. Marcus caught her. She weighed nothing, her body preserved but wasted by centuries of motionless existence. Her lips moved. No sound emerged. Marcus lowered her gently to the deck. Medical teams rushed forward. Valsara's weapon was drawn, though she didn't remember drawing it. The Queen raised one hand. Everything stopped. 19 more, the Queen said quietly. Marcus looked up at her. "Yes, Your Majesty." "You will free them all?" "If you'll permit it." The Queen stepped closer to the viewport. Her reflection in the transparent material looked like a ghost. "Captain Valsara, Your Majesty, clear the chamber. Medical support only. This human will work undisturbed." "Your Majesty, the security protocols are my concern." The Queen's eyes remained fixed on the woman being carried to the medical bay. 300 years, Captain. Let us see if we have been just or if we have been monsters." She signaled her team to fall back. As she moved to the exit, she glanced back once. The human was already reaching for the second field. His expression hadn't changed. It's still calm, still determined, still impossibly terrifyingly human. The second woman convulsed when the field released her. Marcus had expected this. The first woman's relatively smooth extraction had been luck, or perhaps the specific configuration of her particular prison. The second field fought him. It felt alive in a way the first hadn't, as though it had bonded with its prisoner over the centuries, become symbiotic with her suffering. He pulled harder. The field resisted. Medical personnel hovered at the edge of the chamber, their equipment humming with readiness. The Queen watched from her position near the viewport. She hadn't moved in 20 minutes. Velsara stood behind her, a statue of disciplined attention. The woman inside the field was younger than the first, or had been when imprisoned. Her hair floated around her face like dark water. Her eyes tracked Marcus's movements. She was aware. Fully, horribly aware. Marcus thought about 300 years of consciousness without sleep, without rest, without change. The human mind would have shattered in days. These women had endured centuries. Whatever crimes they might have committed, this punishment exceeded any reasonable measure of justice. The field suddenly inverted. The woman shot forward into Marcus's arms with enough force to knock him backward. They hit the deck together. She grabbed his collar with strength that shouldn't have existed in her wasted frame. Her mouth opened. A sound emerged that might have been a word or might have been a scream that had been building for 3 centuries. Medical personnel swarmed him. Marcus released her carefully into their care. She didn't let go of his collar until a sedative took effect. Her eyes closed for the first time in 300 years. The third woman was easier. Marcus was learning the rhythm of the fields now, the way they resonated with their prisoners. Each field had a frequency, a specific vibration that matched the consciousness trapped inside. If he could match that frequency, mirror it, the field would release rather than resist. The fourth woman nearly killed him. Her field had degraded over the centuries, becoming unstable. When Marcus touched it, feedback surged through his nervous system. He felt her pain, her isolation, her endless screaming silence. He felt 300 years compress into a single second of absolute awareness. He fell to his knees. Blood ran from his nose. The Queen moved forward for the first time. Her hand touched his shoulder. "Enough," she said. Marcus shook his head. 16 more. "You are damaging yourself. They have endured worse." The Queen's hand tightened briefly, then released. She stepped back. Marcus rose unsteadily and reached for the 5th field. By the 10th woman, the process had become almost mechanical. Marcus's hands moved with practiced precision. The fields yielded one after another. The medical bay was filling with bodies that hadn't moved in centuries, minds that had remained awake through an eternity of isolation. The 11th woman wept when she was freed. The 12th tried to speak but had forgotten how to form words. The 13th collapsed into catatonia the moment she was released from the field's compression. The 14th looked at Marcus with eyes that held nothing but emptiness. The 15th woman was different. When Marcus touched her field, he felt resistance not from the prison but from the prisoner. She didn't want to be freed. The realization struck him like a physical blow. 300 years of consciousness had broken something fundamental in her psyche. The prison had become her identity. Release meant facing the void of existence without the structure of eternal punishment. Marcus pulled anyway. The field shattered. The woman screamed. Medical personnel caught her as she thrashed. Her screams echoed through the chamber, raw and primal and utterly broken. The Queen's voice cut through the chaos. "Is this mercy, Marcus Webb?" Marcus turned to face her. Blood still traced lines from his nose across his lips. His hands trembled with exhaustion. "I don't know, Your Majesty, but leaving them there isn't justice either. Some of them may have been guilty. Then let them stand trial again, with proper evidence. With the reforms your people implemented precisely because they recognized the old system was flawed." The Queen was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded once. "Continue." The 16th and 17th women came free without incident. The 18th woman's field had partially collapsed at some point over the centuries. She hung suspended in a half-state, neither fully trapped nor fully preserved. When Marcus released her, her body began to age rapidly, catching up on 3 centuries of halted time. Medical personnel surrounded her immediately, injecting stabilizers and temporal regulators. Whether she would survive was uncertain. The 19th woman was the oldest, imprisoned when she had already lived a full life. Her face held lines of age frozen in crystal-perfect detail. When Marcus freed her, she looked at him with clear eyes and spoke in a language he didn't understand. One of the medical personnel translated. "She says thank you. She says she remembers her crime. She says she was innocent." Marcus nodded, unable to speak. 19 freed. One remained. The final prisoner floated in the center of her field, positioned higher than the others. Her stasis bubble gleamed with unusual brightness. As Marcus approached, he understood why. This field was different, stronger, more intricately constructed. This woman had been considered the most dangerous of the 20. Marcus studied her face. She looked younger than the others, though that might have been an illusion of preservation. Her eyes held a peculiar intensity, fixed on some point beyond the field's boundary, as though she could see through it, beyond it, into some space that existed outside normal perception. He placed his hand against the field. The feedback was immediate and overwhelming. This woman's consciousness wasn't trapped. It had expanded. 300 years of enforced meditation had transformed her mind into something vast and strange. She had explored every corner of her own psyche, mapped every memory, analyzed every thought until she had achieved a state of awareness that transcended normal existence. She was aware of Marcus, aware of the Queen. Aware of everything happening around her prison despite the field's isolation properties, Marcus pulled. The field didn't resist. It dissolved. The woman stepped out of the space where she had hung suspended, her feet touching the deck with perfect balance. She wasn't wasted like the others. Her body had somehow maintained itself through pure mental discipline. She looked at the Queen and spoke in a voice that hadn't been used in 3 centuries but emerged clear and strong. Your Majesty, thank you for permitting our release. We have had much time to consider our actions. I am prepared to present evidence of our innocence. The Queen stepped forward. You remember me. I remember the princess you were when we were convicted. You have become the Queen your mother hoped you would be. Velsara's hand moved to her weapon. The Queen raised one finger. The gesture was minimal but absolute. Velsara froze. Speak your evidence, the Queen said. The woman, her name was Valsarna, according to the records Marcus had read, gestured to the empty stasis fields. The poison we were accused of placing in the royal family's water supply was nightshade extract. A crude choice, easily detected. We were the royal herbalists. We knew 1,000 poisons that would have been undetectable. Why would we choose the one that would be discovered immediately? Confession was extracted under interrogation. Torture. The word is torture, Your Majesty. And torture produces the confessions the torturer desires, not the truth. The Queen's expression didn't change. The court official who testified against you died a month after your conviction, assassinated, by the same person who placed the poison and framed us. Court Minister Dalketh. He wanted control of the royal gardens. We refused to grant him access to certain restricted species, so he removed us and took what he wanted. Dalketh served my mother loyally for 40 years after your conviction and enriched himself considerably through black market trade in restricted botanicals. The evidence would still exist in his estate records if anyone chose to look. The Queen studied her for a long moment. Captain Velsara, Your Majesty, you will take a team to the Dalketh archives. You will search for evidence of botanical transactions during the years following these women's convictions. Your Majesty, Dalketh was a minister I trusted, and perhaps a murderer who destroyed 20 lives to advance his position. You will search. Velsara saluted and left. The Queen turned back to Valsarna. You have had 300 years to prepare this defense. 300 years to remember every detail. 300 years to understand what was done to us. And 300 years to wait for justice. If you are innocent, you will be pardoned and compensated. And if we are guilty, then you will be tried again under current law, which does not permit eternal imprisonment. Valsarna smiled. It was a strange expression on a face that hadn't moved in centuries. Then we have already won. Because even if we are convicted again, we will not suffer forever. We will have an ending. Marcus watched the exchange in silence. The Queen's composure remained absolute, but he could see the calculation behind her eyes. This wasn't just about 20 women. It was about the nature of justice itself, about whether punishment could ever be proportionate when extended to infinity, about whether any crime justified eternal suffering. The medical teams were taking the freed prisoners to the station's hospital. Most were in various states of physical and psychological crisis. The woman who hadn't wanted to be freed was sedated and restrained. The woman aging rapidly was surrounded by temporal specialists fighting to stabilize her degraded cellular structure. The Queen watched them go. When the chamber was empty, except for Marcus, Valsarna, and the now vacant stasis fields, she finally spoke again. You did not have to do this, Marcus Webb. These women were not your people. Their suffering was not your responsibility. Suffering is everyone's responsibility, Marcus said quietly. That's what being human means, and if some of them prove to be guilty, then they'll face justice. Real justice, not eternal torture. The Queen turned to Valsarna. You will remain under guard until the investigation is complete. Medical care will be provided. Is this acceptable? More than acceptable, Your Majesty. To feel time passing again, to know that there will be a tomorrow different from today, that alone is mercy beyond measure. The Queen nodded once and left. Her footsteps echoed through the empty chamber. Marcus stood alone with Valsarna, studying the woman who had transcended her own torture through sheer force of consciousness. "Why did you do it?" Valsarna asked. "Why risk yourself for strangers?" Marcus looked at the empty fields floating in the void. 20 prisons that had held 20 lives in eternal suspension. Because I could. Because no one else would. Because sometimes the right thing is obvious if you're willing to see it. Your people must be remarkable. My people are complicated. We've done terrible things, we've created our own hells, but we've also learned, slowly, painfully, that some lines shouldn't be crossed, that some punishments corrupt the punisher more than the punished. Valsarna was silent for a moment. Then, the 15th woman, the one who didn't want to be freed. What will happen to her? I don't know. Therapy. Time. Maybe she'll recover. Maybe 3 centuries broke something that can't be fixed, and you still freed her. Would you rather she stayed there? No. But it takes a particular kind of courage to save someone, even when salvation might hurt more than damnation. He was thinking about the woman's screams, the emptiness in her eyes, the way she had fought against freedom. He was thinking about the 18th woman rapidly aging despite the medical team's best efforts. He was thinking about whether he had saved these women or simply transformed their suffering into a different form. "Do you regret it?" Valsarna asked as though reading his thoughts. "No, but I wonder if I should." Captain Valsara's report arrived 6 days later. The Dalketh archives contained detailed records of illegal botanical trade spanning 43 years. Cross-referenced with the restricted species list maintained by the royal herbalists, the evidence was damning. Dalketh had systematically stolen and sold dangerous plants, generating wealth that should have been impossible on a court minister's salary. More significantly, chemical analysis of the original poison used in the attempted assassination matched a batch of nightshade that Dalketh had acquired 2 weeks before the crime. The herbalist's own stocks contained a different strain, clearly distinguishable by genetic markers. The Queen convened a formal review. Marcus was summoned to attend. He stood in the grand chamber while the evidence was presented, while historians and legal experts debated the implications, while the 20 freed women sat in a row and listened to their innocence being established 300 years too late. The woman aging rapidly had stabilized but remained fragile. The woman who hadn't wanted freedom sat motionless, her eyes distant, her mind still locked in some internal prison she couldn't escape. The others showed varying degrees of recovery. Some wept, some stared. One laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The Queen's judgment was pronounced with the same measured precision she brought to every act. The convictions are overturned, the sentences are vacated. The state acknowledges complete injustice and offers full compensation to the wronged parties. The eternal prison is hereby decommissioned. No sentence of eternal imprisonment will be permitted under any circumstances. This is effective immediately. The chamber erupted in discussion. The Queen raised one hand. Silence fell like a blade. Furthermore, all historical cases involving sentences of eternal imprisonment will be reviewed. Any questionable convictions will be investigated with the same thoroughness applied here. If we have condemned others unjustly, they will be freed and compensated. If we find evidence of corruption in our justice system's history, it will be exposed and acknowledged. She paused, her eyes sweeping the chamber. Justice delayed is justice denied. Justice that lasts forever is not justice at all. It is cruelty masquerading as righteousness. We will not compound our ancestors' mistakes by defending them out of pride. The legal experts began to protest the workload, the implications, the cost of reviewing centuries of cases. The Queen cut through their objections with a single sentence. Begin immediately. The formal proceedings concluded. The freed women were escorted to quarters prepared for them. Medical care would continue indefinitely. Therapy would be provided. Integration specialists would help them adjust to a world transformed beyond recognition during their imprisonment. Marcus was preparing to leave when the Queen approached him. Valsara stood 3 paces behind her, a constant shadow. "Walk with me," the Queen said. It wasn't a request. Marcus followed her through corridors that grew progressively quieter until they stood alone in a garden that overlooked the station's central dome. Stars filled the view, Somewhere out there, the crystalline sphere of the eternal prison drifted in its orbit, empty now, a monument to injustice. "You have created a significant problem, Marcus Webb," the Queen said. "Your actions have called into question 3 centuries of legal precedent. They have implied that my ancestors were either corrupt or incompetent. They have forced my government to undertake a massive review that will consume resources and attention for years." Marcus said nothing. "You have also potentially saved innocent lives," the Queen continued. "You have exposed corruption that continued long after the herbalists were imprisoned. You have forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about our justice system, and you have demonstrated a principle that my people had forgotten." She turned to face him directly. "That mercy is not weakness. That questioning authority is not rebellion. That justice must be examined and re-examined because power corrupts and certainty blinds. Your Majesty, I didn't mean to. Do not apologize for doing what was right. Do not diminish the significance of your actions by pretending they were small. You saw suffering that everyone else had learned to ignore. You questioned a sentence that everyone else had learned to accept. You acted when action was difficult and dangerous." She gestured to the stars. "Do you know why the eternal prison was created? Not as punishment. As a deterrent. My ancestors believed that if criminals knew their punishment would last forever, they would be too afraid to commit crimes. But fear is not a foundation for justice. Fear creates only silence, and in silence corruption thrives. What will happen to the prison? It will be destroyed. Completely, every component will be dismantled. Every record of its construction will be archived as a warning, not a guide. Future generations will know what we built. They will know why it was wrong, and they will know that we had the courage to admit our mistake. Some people will say you're weak for changing the law. Some people are fools. Strength is not rigidity. A tree that cannot bend will break in the storm. A law that cannot be questioned will become tyranny. A justice system that never admits error will eventually serve only itself." The Queen was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "The 15th woman, the one who resisted freedom. What did you feel when you freed her against her will?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Doubt. Fear that I was causing more harm than good. Yet you continued. The prison was the harm. Whatever happens to her now, at least she has the possibility of recovery. In the prison, she had only the guarantee of eternal suffering. Even if she has forgotten how to exist outside that suffering, especially then." The Queen nodded slowly. "That is the difference between your species and mine. We saw those women as problems already solved. They were contained. They were punished. The situation was resolved. But you saw them as people still suffering, still deserving of consideration. You saw the problem as ongoing rather than concluded. You're giving humanity too much credit. We've created plenty of our own eternal prisons. We've justified plenty of our own cruelties. But you also produce people who break those prisons, who question those cruelties, who refuse to accept that suffering is ever truly necessary just because it has been imposed." She turned back to the viewport. "Valsarna told me something interesting. She said that during the centuries of her imprisonment she explored consciousness itself. She learned to perceive time differently, to exist in the moment without the flow of change that normally defines existence. She said she achieved a form of enlightenment through suffering. That doesn't justify the suffering, but it raises a question. If someone gains something from torture, does that mean the torture was valuable?" Marcus felt the trap in the question. He thought about the 15th woman screaming as her prison dissolved, about the 18th woman's body aging rapidly, catching up on stolen centuries, about the others damaged in ways that might never heal. "No," he said finally, "because the value was created by the victim's strength, not by the torture itself. Valsarna transcended her imprisonment despite it, not because of it. And the majority of the other women were simply destroyed by it. One person surviving hell doesn't justify creating hell in the first place." The Queen smiled. It was a small expression, almost invisible, but it was genuine. "Correct. And that is why the eternal prison must be destroyed. Because we cannot celebrate Valsarna's achievement without acknowledging that her achievement required us to torture her for 3 centuries. We cannot honor her strength without condemning our cruelty. And we cannot admit our cruelty while maintaining the system that enabled it. So you're destroying the prison to remove the temptation?" "I am destroying the prison because its existence implies that some crimes deserve infinite punishment. And once you accept infinity as a measure of justice, there is no moral floor. There is no line you cannot cross. There is no cruelty you cannot justify." Valsara stepped forward, her voice quiet but urgent. Your Majesty, if I may speak. The Queen gestured permission. The Royal Guard has served for 1,000 years, Velsara said. We have protected the throne through wars, rebellions, and betrayals. We have maintained order through strength and discipline. But I have never been prouder to serve than I am now, watching you dismantle a weapon that should never have existed. Strength is not the ability to impose suffering. Strength is the courage to acknowledge when you have been wrong. The Queen inclined her head slightly. Thank you, Captain. Your loyalty has always been to principles rather than persons. That is why the Royal Guard endures while dynasties fall. She turned back to Marcus. You will be invited to the prison's destruction. Your presence is required. Required? You freed the prisoners. You must also witness the prison's ending. It is justice of a kind. I don't need recognition. This is not about recognition. This is about responsibility. You made a choice that changed my empire. You will witness the consequences of that choice, both good and difficult. That is the price of action. Marcus met her eyes. I'll be there. Good. One more thing, Marcus Webb. When you return to human space, you will tell this story. You will explain what you saw here. You will help your people understand that eternal punishment is never justified no matter the crime. My people already have their own debates about justice and punishment. Then contribute to those debates. You have experienced something most humans never will. You have seen the physical manifestation of forever. You have touched infinity and survived.
Use that knowledge. Help your people avoid creating their own eternal prisons.
The Queen extended one hand. Marcus took it. The gesture was formal, but the grip was firm. In that moment, Marcus understood that he had not simply saved 20 women. He had forced an entire civilization to confront its capacity for cruelty. He had challenged the assumption that some people were beyond redemption, that some punishments were beyond question. Thank you, the Queen said, for having the courage to be wrong if necessary, for risking yourself, for strangers, for reminding us that justice must be tempered with mercy, or it becomes merely another form of violence. The destruction of the eternal prison was scheduled for exactly 1 month after the last prisoner's release. The delay was deliberate. It gave time for the freed women to recover, for the investigation to complete, for the legal reforms to be drafted. It gave the Empire time to absorb the shock of change. Marcus spent that month watching the 20 women adapt to freedom. Most made progress. Valzarna became something of a spokesperson, appearing in media interviews to discuss her experience with a calm clarity that seemed almost inhuman. Several others gradually learned to speak again, to move without the stiffness of 3 centuries' stillness. 2 women remained in critical condition. The 15th woman, who had resisted freedom, existed in a state of permanent catatonia. Medical personnel kept her body alive, but her mind remained locked in some internal space they couldn't reach. The 18th woman's rapid aging had stabilized, but she was now ancient, her body fragile, her remaining time measured in months at most. Marcus visited them regularly. He didn't speak. There was nothing to say. He simply sat and bore witness to the cost of his choice. Freedom hadn't healed these two. It had simply transformed their suffering from one form to another.
On the 14th day, the 18th woman died.
She passed quietly in the night, surrounded by medical equipment and empty chairs. Marcus learned of her death in the morning. He stood in the medical bay and looked at her covered body and felt the weight of moral ambiguity settle on his shoulders. Had he saved her or killed her? She had been alive in the prison, aware, unchanged. Now she was dead. Her centuries of preserved existence collapsed into a single month of deterioration and ending. Valsarna found him there. She stood beside him in silence for a long moment before speaking. You are wondering if you made the right choice. It wasn't a question. Marcus nodded. The answer is yes, Valsarna said, because she would have died anyway. The prison wasn't immortality, it was suspension. Eventually, even the fields would have degraded. In 1,000 years, or 10,000, they would have failed. She would have died then, having experienced no change, no growth, no possibility of meaning in all that time. She died now instead. With only a month of freedom, a month where she could see the stars, where she could hear voices that weren't echoes of her own thoughts, where she could close her eyes and sleep, truly sleep, for the first time in 300 years. I spoke with her medical team. They said she smiled in her final moments. Do you understand what that means? After 300 years of frozen despair, she smiled before dying.
That is your gift to her. Marcus turned away from the covered body.
The 15th woman isn't smiling. No, she has been destroyed in a way the rest of us weren't. But that destruction was already complete before you freed her. You didn't break her. The prison broke her. You simply revealed what had been hidden behind the field's shimmer. That doesn't feel like a meaningful distinction. It is the most meaningful distinction. The prison allowed us to be broken while remaining invisible. Our suffering didn't matter because no one could see it. You made our suffering visible. You forced the Empire to acknowledge what had been done to us. Even if some of us cannot recover, at least our damage is now recognized rather than ignored. She placed one hand on his shoulder. The gesture was uncertain, as though she had forgotten how to offer comfort. Do not regret freeing us. Regret that we were imprisoned in the first place. Regret that it took 300 years for someone to question whether we deserved eternity. But do not regret giving us the chance to end. The day of the prison's destruction arrived. A special vessel had been constructed for the purpose. Marcus stood on the observation deck alongside the Queen, her advisors, the royal guard, and the freed women who were capable of witnessing. Valsarna stood at the front, her eyes fixed on the crystalline sphere floating in the void. The 15th woman was absent, still catatonic in medical care. The others stood in a line, their expressions varying from grim satisfaction to empty detachment. They wore formal robes provided by the state. They looked like dignitaries attending a funeral. The Queen stepped forward. Her voice carried through the deck speakers, transmitted to every corner of the Empire. The Eternal Prison was created 300 years ago as a symbol of absolute justice. It became instead a symbol of absolute cruelty. Today we acknowledge this truth. We admit our failure. We destroy the instrument of our shame. She raised one hand. Let this destruction stand as a promise. We will never again create suffering without end. We will never again hide injustice behind the appearance of order. We will never again tell ourselves that some people deserve infinity. Her hand dropped. The special vessel accelerated toward the prison. It was unmanned, guided by automated systems packed with specialized explosives designed to destabilize the exotic matter that composed the stasis fields. The vessel struck the prison at relativistic velocity. The explosion was silent in vacuum but visible across the spectrum. The crystalline sphere shattered into fragments that gleamed with impossible colors. The stasis fields, losing their containment, imploded in cascading failures that consumed themselves in bursts of energy that violated known physics. The fragments scattered across kilometers, each one glowing with residual field energy. They would drift through space, eventually burning out, eventually becoming ordinary matter again. But for now they shone like dying stars, like memories of suffering rendered visible. Valsarna spoke quietly. It's beautiful. Marcus glanced at her. The destruction? The ending. We are watching our prison die. We are seeing the space that held us cease to exist. After 300 years of believing this moment would never come, we are witnessing it.
Yes, it is.
The other women remained silent, but several were crying. One reached out and took the hand of the woman beside her. The gesture spread down the line until they stood connected, watching their shared nightmare dissolve into scattered fragments in fading light. The Queen turned to Marcus. You are satisfied with this conclusion? I'm satisfied that it happened. I'm not satisfied that it took so long. History will record your role in this. You will be remembered as the human who freed the eternal prisoners. I'd rather be forgotten if it means no one else ever creates a prison like this. Then you misunderstand the nature of history. We record both our failures and our corrections precisely so we don't forget either. Your name will be attached to this event not as celebration but as instruction. Future generations will learn about the eternal prison. They will learn that it was wrong. And they will learn that it took an outsider to make us see our own cruelty. She paused. That is not a comfortable lesson for my people, but it is a necessary one. The fragments continued to scatter. Within an hour, they would be invisible to the naked eye. Within a day, they would be undetectable except by specialized instruments. Within a year, they would be completely dispersed, return to the basic components of space itself. The prison would become a memory. Then, a historical record. Eventually, a cautionary tale. But it would never again be a possibility. The knowledge of how to build it still existed, but the willingness to use that knowledge had been destroyed along with the structure. Or so Marcus hoped. Velsar approached him as the crowd dispersed. A question, Marcus Webb. Captain, what would you have done if the Queen had refused your request? If she had ordered you to leave the prisoners in their fields? Marcus considered the question. I don't know. I'd like to say I would have fought the order, that I would have found a way to free them regardless. But honestly, I might have just left, carried the knowledge of their suffering back to human space and done nothing because I had no power to act. You doubt your own courage. I doubt my ability to predict what I'd do in a situation I didn't face. I acted because the Queen gave permission. Without that permission, my choice would have been much harder. And that troubles you. It should trouble everyone. Most moral actions are only possible when authority permits them. That means we're all more complicit in injustice than we'd like to believe. Velsara was quiet for a moment. You are a strange being, Marcus Webb. You free prisoners but doubt your courage.
You change an empire but claim no credit.
You make the right choice but question whether it was right. Seems pretty human to me.
Yes?
That is precisely my point. She saluted once, formally, and returned to her position behind the Queen. Marcus watched her go. Then he turned back to the viewport. The last fragments of the eternal prison were fading from sight. Soon there would be nothing left but empty space where horror had existed. Valzarna remained beside him. What will you do now? Return to human space. Write a report. Try to explain what happened here. And when your people ask if we were grateful, what should I tell them? Valsarna smiled. It was still an unusual expression on her face, still something she was relearning after centuries. Tell them that gratitude is insufficient. Tell them that we are transformed. That 20 women learned to exist in a single eternal moment and then remembered how to experience change. Tell them that suffering can be survived but should never be imposed. Tell them that your species understands something we had forgotten, that mercy is not weakness but the ultimate expression of strength. She turned to face him directly. And tell them that one human stood in front of an impossible prison and asked a simple question, why? Tell them that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to accept what everyone else has learned to tolerate. Marcus nodded slowly. I'll try. That is all any of us can do. Try. Fail. Try again. Keep trying until the trying itself creates change. The final fragments vanished from sight. The space where the eternal prison had existed looked no different from any other space. Empty. Neutral. Unmarked by the centuries of suffering it had contained. But it was different. Absence was different from emptiness. The prison was gone, and its absence was a presence of its own. A reminder, a warning, a promise. Never again. Marcus hoped the promise would hold. He suspected it wouldn't. Not forever. Humans had made the same promise about their own atrocities. Sometimes they kept it. Sometimes they found new ways to rationalize old cruelties. Memory faded. Lessons were forgotten. History repeated. But for now, in this moment, standing beside a woman who had survived 300 years of eternal imprisonment, watching the scattered fragments of her prison fade into cosmic background, Marcus allowed himself to believe that sometimes change was possible. That sometimes asking why was enough. That sometimes the right action, however delayed, could create ripples that transformed entire civilizations. Valsarna said quietly, for seeing us, for refusing to look away, for giving us an ending. Marcus didn't respond with words. He simply stood beside her, bearing witness to the space where horror had been, and where now there was only stars, distance, and the infinite possibility of what could come next. The Queen's voice echoed through the deck one final time. Let the record show that on this date, the eternal prison was destroyed. Let it show that 20 innocent women were freed after 3 centuries of unjust imprisonment. Let it show that we acknowledged our failure and corrected it, and let it show that sometimes justice requires us to admit we were wrong and do better. A pause, then, session concluded. The past is archived, the future begins now. The observation deck emptied slowly. The freed women dispersed to their new lives, to therapy and medical care, and the slow process of learning to exist in linear time again. Valsarna lingered for a moment, her hand resting on the viewport, her eyes fixed on the empty space beyond. Then she too turned and left, walking steadily, her posture straight, her movements confident. She looked like someone who had finally, after an eternity of waiting, arrived at the beginning of something new. Marcus remained alone on the deck. He thought about the 18th woman who had died. About the 15th woman still trapped in internal catatonia. About the cost of right action, the weight of unintended consequences, the complexity of moral choices that could never be purely good or purely harmful. He thought about humanity's own prisons, physical and legal and social, about the eternal punishments humans impose through isolation, through permanent criminal records, through systems designed to break people rather than reform them. About his own species' capacity for cruelty disguised as justice. He thought about going home and trying to explain what he had learned, that mercy was hard, that justice was complicated, that sometimes the right thing was obvious, but acting on it required courage that might or might not exist when needed. He thought about the simple question that had started everything: are those people alive in there? And he thought about how many places, both human and alien, held people who were alive but invisible, suffering but ignored, trapped but tolerated because freeing them would require someone to ask uncomfortable questions and accept uncomfortable answers. The observation deck was empty now, except for him. The space where the eternal prison had existed showed no sign that it had ever been there. The universe had absorbed its destruction without comment, without judgment, without memory. But Marcus would remember. And Valsarna would remember. And the 19 other freed women would remember. And the queen would ensure that her entire empire remembered. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes memory was the only weapon against repetition. Sometimes telling the story was the only way to prevent the story from happening again. Marcus turned from the viewport and walked toward the exit. Behind him, empty space stretched to infinity. Before him, a corridor led back to the station, back to diplomatic meetings and farewell ceremonies, back to his own ship and the journey home. He didn't look back. The prison was gone. The prisoners were free or dead or damaged beyond repair. The right thing had been done, imperfectly, with cost, with consequences both intended and otherwise, and somewhere in human space other prisons existed. Other suffering continued. Other questions waited to be asked. Marcus Webb walked forward, carrying the weight of what he had seen, carrying the responsibility of what he had done, carrying the knowledge that sometimes one person asking why could change everything, but only sometimes. And only if they were willing to accept the answer.